It's Monday, and that means it's time for a new episode of Interviewing People, the career cast where you can learn about a variety of careers from people actually doing the work. Today I'll be talking with Colin Causey, who once walked these halls and is a computer scientist who has studied philosophy and worked at 2 national laboratories and is now working toward his master's degree at Case Western Reserve University. Colin will be sharing about his path to becoming a computer scientist, his love of the MBA, and much more, so enjoy the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Interviewing People Career Cast. And today we have 2014 Van Buren graduate Colin Causey with us. And Colin has an extensive educational background that he's going to be discussing. And he's also going to be talking about going back to graduate school. And Colin, thank you very much for joining us today. And I'd like to hear you start by talking about where you were when you ended high school as far as what your plans were. Did those plans come to fruition, or did they make any minor or major changes once you left high school?
Yeah, so in high school, I think I was definitely intent on being a game developer. I wanted to go into game development and be a computer graphics engineer. I was always really interested in kind of developing the technology behind what you see on the screen and simulating light realistically and making photographic looking images on screen. But shortly after graduating from high school, I got really into philosophy, and I got less interested in game development. There's also the problem of 80-hour work weeks, which didn't sound like a lot of fun. Yeah, I got really into philosophy, and then I went into college. And at that point I thought, well, I think I probably want to be a software engineer of some sort, but maybe not a game developer. But I ended up double majoring in computer science and philosophy with a mathematics minor. I got my first internship sophomore year of college. I worked at a software startup in Findlay, founded by Terry Terhark. So I worked there for a summer and just kind of wrote code all day. And at the time I loved it. I thought like, oh, this is great. I just writing code all day. But then a couple years later, I thought, I don't know if that's what I really want to do is just kind of write code all day, sitting in front of a screen. I wanted something a little more dynamic. So then after graduating from, well, maybe I should stop there as far as that. That's like where I was in high school, and then things kind of shifted.
Okay, perfect. And, talk a little bit about the idea of computer science and philosophy. Do you see those as being closely related? Did you have a lot of classmates who had that same double major, or how did you find the connection between those two ideas?
Yeah, so I think I was probably the only one in the school at the time with double major in computer science and philosophy. The math and computer science departments work really closely together as far as like scheduling. So I had some scheduling conflicts with philosophy and computer science because they don't really work together in terms of the departments.
Right.
Yeah, so at first I thought, there's not really much of a connection at all. I just kind of liked both of them. But as I began to study both of them in more depth, I realized that there is a kind of common skill set, especially with respect to theoretical computer science, where it really is logic heavy. You're trying to prove that certain algorithms exist or that certain algorithms don't exist that solve a specific problem. You're writing a computer program and you're trying to prove that the program correctly solves the problem. And that's all basically formal logic. You have premises. It's almost like proving the soundness of an argument in philosophy. So in philosophy, you'll have like an argument, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. And you can prove that conclusion follows from the premises. Well, in theoretical computer science, you're trying to prove that the correct result follows from the lines of code in the program. And it's a lot like proving the soundness of an argument in philosophy. You're using kind of the same skill set of rules of logic and so forth. And they can get pretty abstract. More applied areas of computer science are less similar. So like if you're just talking about just writing an application for an iPhone or something, there's less similarities to philosophy. But on the theoretical side, at least, there's a lot of connections between the two. And so for my undergrad thesis, I sort of combined both of them. I did my thesis on the computational theory of mind. the idea that the mind is a kind of computer program running on the hardware of the brain, and that in principle, if you can program a computer in the appropriate way, that it will have states of consciousness and genuine intelligence. So my paper was on a critique of that theory, and it kind of brought to bear everything I had learned in philosophy and theoretical computer science. Most people that I talk to say, oh, like that's really cool, right brain and left brain. I'm like, I think they're both pretty left brain, but I know what they're saying about right brain because you do a lot of writing in philosophy, and there's a lot of creativity with coming up with thought experiments and counterexamples to different principles.
Right.
But I do think the philosophy is pretty left brain as well.
That's interesting. So was University of Findlay pretty open to you combining those two, or was that something that you said the schedules didn't always align? Was it something they didn't necessarily encourage, or were they supportive the entire time of that?
I think they're really supportive of it. I mean, as a liberal arts school, I think they're all about, a well-rounded education, as they say. Yeah, so I mean, they worked with me pretty well. I mean, there's like maybe a couple of times where I had to push a class back to the next semester, but for the most part, I was able to set things up pretty well. There's one point where we didn't think I was going to be able to take an epistemology class, but they were willing to just have it be an independent study if need be. But I ended up being able to take the class regularly.
So when we think of, you talked a little bit about your internship at Rander. It looks like your other internship at the Argonne National Laboratory, that was also while you were in college. Can you talk a little bit about how you ended up with that internship and what you did there?
Yeah, so it was actually right after graduation.
Okay.
I actually graduated in December.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that came about, one of my math professors recommended me to apply to the program. The Department of Energy has a program called Science Undergraduate Laboratory Internships, or the SULLI program. And so he said, well, that would be a great thing to do. I think we had one previous student from the University of Findlay that had been accepted to the program before. So I went ahead and applied, and I was accepted. So then I went to Argonne National Laboratory, which is one of 17 national laboratories in the country associated with the Department of Energy. And they're based near Chicago. So that was a 4-month internship. And I basically just lived in the hotel on the laboratory premises. All of that was provided as part of it. So I just stayed in the hotel and had room service, which was nice. And it was convenient because I could just walk to my office right from the hotel. Although some of the Chicago winter days were pretty brutal.
Yeah, it would be.
But yeah, so I worked with a computational chemist there working on a thermochemical database application. So I basically had to come up with a database that allowed us to store a lot of thermochemical information about different chemical substances and thermodynamic properties pertaining to them. So I had to kind of design the database, kind of read in the information, and then be able to version control it as well, where we had different versions of our data going back, I think, to the early 2000s. And the idea was to make it easy to easily access any particular version of the data at any time, and to allow people to do interesting queries like, okay, so suppose I upload this new experimental data, how does that change the overall state of the database? How does it change calculations with some of these chemical substances? So that was interesting. It was, the challenge there was the fact that it was, I only had a very short time to develop it. It was a shorter internship, but I was working pretty regular hours still. I'd say probably an average 8 hours a day. Every now and again, I would take my work home with me if I didn't feel like I finished as much as I should have. But that was really interesting. In undergrad, after taking my database class, I thought, I really don't want to ever work with the database professionally. I was like, this just isn't me. But most of my professional work so far has been on database systems. So you never know what can happen.
Right.
And it's been pretty enjoyable too, which was good. I think part of it was the database class I took in undergrad was from 6:30 to 9 p.m. It was like a once a week, 2.5-hour class in the evening, and it was kind of brutal for that reason.
Right, right, right.
Um, but yeah, that was Argonne.
Very interesting. So how did that translate, or did that help translate to you earning your position at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee?
Yeah, I think it was a big factor. So after I finished the internship at Argonne, then I took like maybe a month off, and then I applied to Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I had been recommended by my boss at Argonne to look at other national labs that would have additional opportunities. So I applied there, and I think my experience at a national lab before that was really significant. So I had an interview that went really well. And so then I started working at Oak Ridge, and I worked there for about a year, from June 2019 to June 2020. And there I also worked on database systems. I worked on a couple of different software projects involving database systems. And so it was kind of research and development. I did research on different ways that you could version control a database. So in software development, there's this problem of version controlling the code, where you have different versions of the software. You have a version that you're currently developing new features on, and then the version that the customers are currently using. And so eventually you get to a point where it's time to deploy the latest code to the customer software. And so you release an update that the customer downloads or whatever. And so that process is pretty well figured out when it comes to source code. But when it comes to database systems, the problem's a lot harder, because with source code, you can just completely delete the current code and replace it with new code. It doesn't matter. But with a database, you have data. You can't just delete the data. Customers aren't going to be happy about that. So there's a lot of challenges with version controlling database systems and deploying changes, because some changes you might not be able to roll back. And if you deploy a new piece of code and like, oh my goodness, there's a huge security problem now, you can easily just roll back and replace it with the old code that you know is working. But with a database system, if you're making changes to the data, that's a problem. Or if you add a new column of data, so you can think of like an Excel sheet as a kind of example. If you add a new column to the Excel sheet and a customer enters data into it, and now it's like, oh, but we got to roll back the database because there's a security bug. Well, if you roll back the change where you added the column, now you're deleting that column, all the data is gone. That's not good. So there's just a lot of issues with that. So I did a lot of kind of research into how to design a database that could be version controlled like that and to automate it as much as possible, which was pretty interesting work. And then I applied it to some specific software projects that we were working on as part of our team. Yeah.
Was that all, I'm assuming that was all work for the government. You weren't doing anything for any private entities or anything like that?
No, yeah, it was all government stuff. So we have this weatherization program available in various states across the country. And basically we have an energy auditor go into a low-income household, and he'll take measurements on a whole lot of different things about energy efficiency in the house. And he'll enter all that data into our program, and then we'll run calculations and everything. And then we'll come up with, hey, if you were to add this kind of insulation to this house, you would save this amount of money on energy and so forth. And basically, as long as we at least break even, we would go ahead and do the retrofitting for the house and make the changes, put in the insulation or the new kinds of windows or whatever else. As long as we break even, we would do that, because even if we break even, we're still saving energy. But in most cases, we can actually save money over the long haul, like over the course of at least 5 years. We'll get the money back, and then the person will save a lot of money on energy expenses. So that was one software system that I worked on as far as its database system and everything, and figuring out version controlling for its database. We had another system as well, which was similar, except it was ordered towards not residential housing, but towards like factories and more industrial facilities, where we could optimize energy efficiency and those kinds of things. Similar thing, both have databases. The weatherization database was a lot more complicated, because we basically have a database for every single state, like an independent database. And so a big challenge there was trying to have all the databases kind of in sync with each other in terms of their logical structure. The issue when I first started was we didn't really know how they compared to each other. So the Tennessee database might have been a different version than the Minnesota database. And so the bugs we might have in one wouldn't be in the other and vice versa. So it was kind of a mess to try to develop it. So that was kind of my first task, was like wrangling these databases and getting them under control. So it was definitely stressful at first. I made a blunder where I pushed a bad change to a database, and then I just see someone say in Slack, like, "Did somebody just mess with something?" I'm like, oh no. But we got to figure out. And once because the issue is, like, I was trying to like sew my parachute as I was falling. It was like I had to get them under control and get them synced, but at the same time the developers are continuing to make changes to them.
Right.
So it's, I couldn't just say like, hey, you guys got to stop working so I had to do it all at once. So that was the challenge at first, but I think 6 months into it, I got pretty comfortable, and things went pretty well.
So was that a new position, or had there been someone there? Because it sounds like you had to come in and clean up a lot of things, or create a lot of new new ways to manage the database and so forth. So was it new, or was it a replacement situation?
I'm not entirely sure. I think it was mostly new. So I think there are a couple of other developers who were kind of working on the side, but they were really busy with a lot of the other stuff.
Okay.
So it was like they kind of needed like someone to come in who could just be dedicated just to that part of it.
Right.
And kind of do it, because they were dealing with a lot of other stuff as well. So I think either it was mostly new, or there could have been a dedicated person at one point, but I think if that's the case, it had been some time at least. Right. Since there had been.
That's interesting that, again, I'm sitting here in a classroom with lights, with, air moving around the room, so forth, electricity. And, I don't stop and think very often about all of that energy. And you were looking at the entire country and trying to save us some energy, which could end up being millions and millions of dollars saved if you could find a way to make that more efficient. So that's really, really interesting. You worked there for about a year, and now you're currently working on a master's degree in computer science at Case Western Reserve in the Cleveland area. And what led you to make that change to go for your master's, and what ultimate outcome do you want to come from that?
So I think I was always planning on going to grad school. After undergrad, I was a little bit burned out, so I wanted to take a little time off and work full time, which I actually liked a lot better. It was just kind of nice. For the most part, when I was done at work, I was done. I could just, the rest of the evening was mine. Weekends were always off. Every now and again, I took work home with me, mostly just because I thought, well, I should have gotten this done and I didn't. So I might work a Saturday or two on something. And every now and again, like some weird thing would pop up one of our systems, my boss would Slack me and I would just briefly intervene to fix it. But that was usually in like 30 minutes at most after I got back to my apartment. So I did like that a lot better overall. No homework and no exams to study for. But I ultimately thought, like, well, 10 years from now, would I regret not going to grad school or going to grad school more? And I decided, well, I probably regret not going to it. So I thought, like, well, 10 years from now, it's like, man, I should have done that. At this point, it's kind of too late probably. So I thought, well, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to grad school then. So the other thing is I'm leaning now towards being a professor. So I'm working on my master's in computer science now. And after that, I'm planning on pursuing a doctorate in philosophy. So I think it would be cool to teach at a university and maybe teach in both departments. I could teach computer science and philosophy classes. And that would be kind of my pitch, would be you can kind of get 1.5 professors for the price of one, in some sense.
Right.
Not quite two, because I can't dedicate the same number of hours to both departments.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So a few times you've brought up Slack in your work environment and so forth. So I guess two questions here. Is email dead in those work environments and Slack is the way that everyone goes? And what have you learned about the importance of communication from being in the workplace?
Yeah. So email is definitely not dead. We definitely had regular emails. Slack, for the most part, emails were for the purpose of like laboratory-wide stuff, whereas like the individual teams use Slack. And communication is extremely important, especially in software development, where you're working on this large piece of software, everybody's writing code in different parts of the system at the same time, and you got to coordinate changes and releases of the software to the customer. So it's huge. If you have one developer who's working on one thing and then you don't know that and you're working on the same thing, that's a huge waste of time. There's going to be a lot of conflicts, whatever. So it's really important. And the advantage of Slack over email is that it's a lot quicker generally. It's basically just an instant messaging thing, basically analogous to text. But in addition to that, we also had daily stand-up meetings where we would just hop on to Skype or Teams or whatever for 20 minutes to give like a daily update. Like, here's what I did yesterday. Here's the issue I'm having. And then we can kind of coordinate work for the next day. So we kind of had that daily. And then every month we would have a large planning session where we would go, we would reflect on the previous month's work, what went right, what went wrong, and then, okay, here's the next milestone we have to get to. So communication was a major part of our development methodology. We had daily stand-ups, we had Slack during the day, we had monthly planning meetings and so forth. That was a big part of it.
How many developers would you say were working on a project at a time in general?
So for us, I think it was about 10 people for weatherization and maybe 4 or 5 people for the other software, for the industrial software, which we called Measure. So small teams, for sure. Compared to, Microsoft or something where you might have hundreds of developers working on Microsoft Office.
Right.
So smaller teams, but I mean, even with 10 people, communication is really vital as far as planning out how you're going to develop the software and so forth. But it was nice for that reason, though. I think I like smaller environments better. Personally, just kind of psychologically, because I feel like I'm actually like really making a contribution. It's not like, oh, they could just knock me off the team and they wouldn't really skip a beat.
Right.
I like the psychological feeling of like I'm actually like really making a big impact.
Right. So as you describe all of this, it sounds very challenging to me. And knowing you, I know you like a challenge. Is there ever a time where you want to be in your comfort zone, or are you just the way you are, you like to be challenged constantly, and this is a career field that really allows you to be challenged constantly?
I think it depends on the day. There are some days where it's like, man, I really wish I was doing something a lot easier. The biggest thing for me is, especially in a team context, it's like I'm always terrified like I'm going to make somebody's job more difficult because I've messed up. That's one thing where school is easier, because if I mess up an assignment, it's like it just affects me for the most part, unless it's a group project. But for the most part, if I mess up an assignment, that just affects me. Nobody else is made more miserable as a result. Right. In a team environment, though, it's like, man, if I really mess this up, like that's gonna ruin us as a team. So there's pressure. I felt like a lot of pressure, especially for the first few months, where it was like I didn't know what I was doing at all. I had to get a feel for what's going on. I had to get a feel for like what the problems were, and then I had to do a lot of research in different technologies we could use to solve the problem. And then it was like, I'm kind of, especially like my first release to the production environment, my first release to like the customer facing software was like, oh gosh, it was dreadful. But eventually after that, it's like, okay, like now I kind of built up some confidence. And I think 6 months in, I was like, okay, I'm pretty comfortable now. I've gotten a good position. I got a good handle on things. But yeah, I think that it kind of comes in cycles where, like, at first it's like, oh man, I really wish this was way easier. And then it's like, okay, now I'm comfortable with it. Like now I really want to challenge. But then a little bit into that, it's like, this is like a little much now. I wish it was a little easier. And then a lot of times it kind of does do that, where there's a period of challenge and then you kind of get a hang of it. And then you go for a while and it's like, okay, I'm getting kind of bored. I want another challenge. And then that usually comes. There's some new feature that we need now, and it's a new challenge. So it kind of comes and goes. I think there's something called like the Peter principle or Peter's principle, where it's like basically you get promoted until you're incompetent, basically. as soon as you get comfortable, you get promoted, and eventually you'll get promoted to the point where you can't succeed anymore, and you'll inevitably fail. I like challenges, but sometimes it's nice to be comfortable as well. I mean, it's nice to have some easy wins every now and again, just to build up confidence and to get kind of a reprieve from the intensity of the challenge.
Right, right. And, variety, obviously always a great thing to just not have to do the same thing every day. And like you said, with databases, you thought that was going to be horrible to do that constantly. And well, it's turned out to not be quite as bad with some of that variety. So as you have gone through these experiences in the workplace, what's the most interesting place you've seen or the most interesting thing you've done as part of that work?
I think Oak Ridge is probably the most interesting place. We do pretty much everything there. I mean, we have computer science, math, physics, chemistry, engineering, even like medical research. Originally, it was part of the Manhattan Project. Okay. So we did a lot of like nuclear weapons research and stuff there originally, back in the day. Now, as far as I know, I've been told that we no longer do weapons research, but I wouldn't know if they did. I didn't have clearance. But I was told, no, we just do like reactor stuff now. We don't do weapons, but okay. Who knows? It was funny though, because like, when I take walks on my lunch break, right off the sidewalk, there's a sign that says radioactive material buried here, like warning.
Really?
And apparently not too long before I was there, my boss said she basically always had to have, all employees had to have like a Geiger counter on them. Just in case they walked past an area that might have like a slight amount of radiation.
Right.
But I think they're no longer required to wear that. I think it's small enough now where it's pretty negligible.
Right.
But I got to see a lot of really cool demonstrations of different technologies. One thing we're notable for is supercomputing. So Oak Ridge had for a while the most powerful supercomputer in the world, and we're shortly going to get the #1 position again. So our current one is called Frontier. Well, the one under development is called Frontier, and that's going to be an exascale supercomputer, which means that it can do in excess of 10 to the 18 or a quintillion computations per second, which is just kind of incomprehensible. Right. But basically, people from across the lab use the supercomputer all at the same time. You kind of set up like, hey, I want to reserve 2 hours of computing time with, I want this amount of memory and I need this number of CPUs, and you kind of schedule your jobs that way. We usually have like 3 supercomputers in operation at once, and when we get the 4th one, we retire the oldest one. So when I was there, they were looking to retire our oldest one, and we were trying to give it away for free to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, that the lab works closely with, but they didn't have the power supply to run it. So I'm not sure what ended up happening, if we just destroyed it or if we found someone. They wouldn't give it to me. I would have tried to plug it into my home outlet, see if it would.
I was going to say, I'm sure there's some gamers out there that would have loved to have had that for amazing graphics.
And then we're also known for, we have a huge 3D printing facility. So we actually 3D printed a Shelby Cobra in 24 hours. Now, with our current technology, we can make that print in 12 hours. I think our peak is like 1,000 pounds of material printed per hour that we can do now.
Wow, that's amazing.
And then I also saw this, basically this kind of clothes dryer that used hypersonic vibrations to dry the clothes. So basically they would take a soaking wet cloth and they would put it on this thing, and it would kind of scream it dry. You could just see the water just fly off of it, and it was dry in 3 seconds. So they were looking to try to come up with a form factor where they could actually sell it as a product, so people could actually use it as a drying machine at home. Right. They hadn't come up with that yet. It was just kind of a prototype, but that was pretty cool to see.
Right. Oh yeah. And obviously that would take a lot less energy than a normal clothes dryer like we have today. So wow, that's really interesting. You talked also earlier about when you earned the position at Oak Ridge that someone you had worked with at Argonne had played a role in that. Can you talk about an important relationship that you've built that's really helped you either during your college time or during your professional time?
Yeah. So I developed a pretty good relationship with most of my professors. So that was really good, especially my philosophy advisor uh, developed a really good relationship with, and he's always been willing to help me and write a letter of recommendation or whatever. Also, one of my math professors, who was the one who originally recommended me to apply to the Department of Energy program, he's been really big in helping me. Um, and he knows, he has connections with people at different universities and national laboratories and things. Same with my boss that had at Argonne. His recommendation was extremely valuable given his position. So yeah, I think it's really important to have connections. And a lot of times you might think like, oh, he probably doesn't really know like too many people actually, but actually he probably does. It's amazing the connections that some people have that you wouldn't think. But because, I mean, especially in academia, you're all kind of publishing to the same kind of peer-reviewed journals and stuff. And so you come in, you go to conferences and you rub elbows at different people and make connections.
Right.
So I think that's really important. Letters of recommendation, I think, are vital, not just for grad school, but for initial employment at least as well. Yeah, I think it's really big.
Right. So I know you were really big into the NBA when you were in high school. So I guess I'm just wondering, do you still follow the NBA? Who's your favorite team and player? And were you happy with the Bucks winning the championship?
Oh yeah, I definitely still follow the NBA. Yeah, I don't think that'll ever go away. Always been a huge NBA nerd. I just like I love the history and different players and the legacies and eras and so forth. My current favorite player is LeBron. As someone who lives in Ohio, that shouldn't be too much of a surprise. And I wasn't as outraged about the whole Miami thing. I thought the way he did it was pretty bad. But at the same time, he was 25.
True.
If that's the worst thing that you've done at 25, you're living a pretty decent life. You just, screwing over a fan base. The other thing is I also previously liked Miami because my favorite player of all time is Shaq.
Oh,
So
okay.
when Shaq went to Miami, I'm like, okay, I like Miami now. I was kind of one of those fans. I was like, well, wherever Shaq is, that's my team. So I kind of ended up liking the Heat. So I'm like, okay, like that's kind of cool. Like I liked Wade. But then of course he came back and gave us a miraculous championship in 2016.
Right.
So okay, at that point, he came back and pulled off a miracle, beat a 73 win team.
Right.
But
Now,
yeah, so my favorite team now. I still do like the Heat. I like the Lakers, historically especially. I mean, Shaq had his most success in the Lakers, and I love the Showtime Lakers with Magic and Kareem and Worthy, and I like LeBron as well.
right.
But and I still cheer for the Cavs, although that they haven't been particularly good since LeBron left. Still fun to watch though. As far as the Bucks, no, I definitely wanted the Suns to win, mostly for Chris Paul. I thought like this might be the last chance he has to really win a championship. He's like 36, and he doesn't have a ring yet. But I have nothing against Giannis. I think he's great, and he earned it. So if it was anyone else, it's like I'd probably cheer for the Bucks. But specifically with respect to Chris Paul, it's like, well, I'd like to see him get a ring. This might be his last chance.
Right.
We'll see.
Now, as more teams professionally get into analytics and everything else, could you ever see yourself going into some of that with your computer science background?
Maybe. I mean, probably not full time, but maybe part time or something. Or if they ever come up with like a peer-reviewed journal of basketball analytics, can publish some articles or something.
Sounds like something you should start.
Maybe, yeah, that would be interesting. I don't know how many people would be on board writing in it, but that would be an interesting like subfield to create. And
Right.
yeah. I mean, there's probably some people who would write to that. I can't think of his name now, but he's a statistician who at least at one point worked for ESPN. He's the one who came up with the player efficiency rating, or PER, for basketball stats. It's basically supposed to be like an all-in-one number for like the total statistical contribution that a player makes. So, I mean, he did a lot of like research and mathematical work, kind of developing criteria for how to calculate the number. So, I mean, there are people who do work on like those kind of theoretical aspects that
Right.
maybe there would be people who'd be on board with contributing to a journal like that. But yeah.
I will definitely read it if you create it. So as we wrap up here, you obviously have had a lot of experiences since you graduated from Van Buren in 2014. If you could go back to yourself in high school based on what you know now, what is it that you know now that you wish you had known then?
There's definitely a lot of life lessons that I wish I would have known. Just things like, I wish I would have appreciated what I had in the moment. Um, I think that that's true, like my childhood in general. It's like, I wish I could go back when I was 10, like, you should really appreciate this because it's going to be gone. I don't know. I guess I was probably fairly naive in high school. Like I just kind of thought like, oh, I'll just kind of do this and whatever. And I guess I didn't really plan out things all that much.
I think that idea of having a plan, I think there's a lot of students that kind of like you just feel like, well, things will happen. I was the exact same way. I thought, oh, I'll just go out and live life and everything will fall into place. And, if I would have had more of a plan, would I be exactly where I am today? I have no idea. I might be, but I didn't really happen to life. I let life happen to me. And I think that's what a lot of people do. And it's sounding like you're saying, I wish I would have had more of a plan so that I could have happened to life as opposed to it happening to me.
Yeah. And I guess that now that I think about it, one thing is, I kind of wish I would have been more disciplined maybe. So insofar as, because I actually senior year of high school, I was not. I thought like I'm gonna get my bachelor's and that's gonna be it. I'm not gonna go for a doctorate or anything. But since I am now, it's like okay, I wish I would have taken like maybe more college classes and I would have been maybe more ambitious. I almost think like if I really would have worked at it, like I could have a doctorate now already. And now it's like I feel like I'm almost a bit behind. So I feel like if I would have had it more planned out, I would have been more disciplined and I would have worked harder in that sense.
Right. Well, and I'm guessing what are there 330 million people in the U.S. I'm guessing 330 million people probably are having those same thoughts about their lives. So yeah, I think that's a pretty universal regret when we look back at ourselves in high school. But that's good for current high schoolers to hear that, hey, have a plan, don't sell yourself short, so forth. So I think that's good advice for them. So if someone wanted to learn more about a career in computer science, a career in philosophy, obviously we have your LinkedIn address that I can include at the end here. Is there any other way that people might reach out to you if they wanted to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, I would give out my email. My Findlay.edu email. So
Okay.
that would be causeyc@findlay.edu, CAUSEYC@findlay.edu. Shoot me an email anytime. I do get reply anxiety. So sometimes like it takes me a few days to get back. I really don't know why. It's like, oh, I got to make sure I word this in the right way. And even when it's like a 3-sentence thing, it's like, oh, I don't know why. It's just a weird psychological quirk of mine.
That is okay. And yeah, I don't think any of us are going to be needing an immediate response with anything. But yeah, again, you're in a really interesting field, doing a lot of really interesting work. And that's good for students to hear, and they might want to learn more. So I greatly appreciate everything that you've shared with us. And good luck with your master's degree and your future MBA stats blog or whatever you create journal. And I'm excited to see where your career goes from here.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invite and the opportunity to talk.
Thank you for watching this interview with Colin Causey. I hope you learned valuable information about a career as a computer scientist and philosopher. And to be sure you don't miss upcoming interviews, please click subscribe so you'll know when the next episode is released. Thank you for watching, and as always, remember the best part about Mondays is interviewing people.